it's an old fishing and farmers country, so that's really what the club are about as well. We're not fancy in any way. We're a hardworking club and a very small club, and as our chairman put it so beautifully, we have to be best at the things that doesn't cost anything. So that's what Mjällby all about. It's about team spirit and taking the job.
Welcome in, everyone, to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. It's been a few weeks since myself, Steve Wyss, and Jonathan Fadugba did an episode, but lots has happened since we were last on air. Jonathan, how are you doing, my friend? What's the latest with you? And I can sense there's a lot of excitement about you tonight.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Yes, as you'll have just heard there, the words of Anders Torstensson from 2021 October. And Steve, I think we're in for maybe arguably one of the most legendary episodes in this podcast history, because we probably have maybe arguably the biggest event in the podcast history. Mjällby are champions. You'll have heard that by now. Pretty much every news outlet you can imagine to hear, not just the Nordic Football Podcast. It's made international news. I've seen a lot of people talking about it, Steve. And yeah, as you'll have heard, Anders Torstensson there in 2021, giving a bit of a sense of what Mjällby represents. I don't think that day, Steve, you, me, or Anders probably thought 4 years later they would make such a historic achievement, winning the Allsvenskan title, the Swedish league title, for the first time in the club's entire history. An unbelievable achievement, Steve. So, yeah, I'm very excited about this episode. We're going to talk about them. We've got a lot to talk about as well in Norway. We've also got European games coming up, like you said, Steve. And we've even got an English manager as the head coach of the national team of Sweden. So, I mean, it's all kicking off this week on the Nordic Football Podcast. But before we get into all that, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm pretty well. It feels like it's been a hectic few weeks. National team talk. We rarely talk about national teams on here, unless there's a World Cup or Euros going on. So that is obviously an interesting part we're going to look forward to. Action going on in Elite Serie and Allsvenskan. Looking ahead to the Euro games as well. Some interesting ones this week. Brand Rangers topping the bill. But we can only start in one place, can't we? And that is with the title winners of the Allsvenskan. That is Mjällby, who, a massive congratulations to them. They have won 2-0 against IFK Göteborg tonight to secure the title. They've won 20 games out of 27, 6 draws and 1 defeat, and they cannot be caught. There's 3 games to spare. You were texting me earlier and said they need 1 more point, I think, to break a league record, or for points, or is it 1 win? And it's a remarkable story. Everyone has seen this, like you said. It's doing the rounds. It's like a Cinderella story, or all sorts of stuff like that. We're going to tell you why it is such a big story, how they managed to do it, why this is such a sort of a unique story. We might never see the likes of it again. So, let's first of all, beating the IFK Göteborg 2-0, Jonathan. I must send my personal congratulations to the whole squad, the players, the manager, Anders Torstensson, who we're going to talk about as well. What's your instant reaction from that result tonight?
Yeah, the first thing we have to do is congratulate the entire football club, Steve. I think, like you just said there, you put it very well. We're gonna talk about the whole club. We're going to put this into context. There's, you get a lot of stories about it, and people trying to put the achievement into context. I've seen Leicester City as an example. I think it's a bigger story than that, Steve, in some ways. More of an organic story, in a way. It does make you realise how big that Leicester City achievement was, because people say it can't be done, and maybe in the Premier League. But certainly, the nobody ever thought this would happen in Allsvenskan, I don't think. And even Anders Torstensson, like I say, in that first interview we had with him in 2021, If you go back in the archives, I don't think even he at that point would have thought about it. I mean, if we were right to that day, Steve, we had a little chat about it off air, and it all started for us when Mjällby had just gone on a run and it just hired Anders Torstensson. He was a school principal. He had taken the job. He'd come out of semi-retirement, Steve. He was playing paddle and fishing with his grandkids, enjoying life. And he got a call from Mjällby to come back to the club that he holds close to his heart. And the reason we got him on the podcast that time, Steve, was because, and obviously we'll talk about it in more detail, but just to give an introduction, is because the club had just gone on the brink of breaking the Allsvenskan record for clean sheets. Torstensson had come in basically and just sorted his team out defensively, and they kept clean sheet after clean sheet after clean sheet. I think it was 8 in a row. And we were like, let's talk to this guy. Let's speak to someone at Mjällby and find out what's going on there. And we spoke to Anders Torstensson. And from that day on, we've kind of had a bit of a bromance, let's say, with the club in general, because we were so impressed by Anders Torstensson and everything that we learned in that episode. The military mastermind, of course, the ex-military man. And we've kept in touch with him ever since. But I think even then, Steve, nobody would have ever thought that they could go on to win the title. They avoided relegation that season, and that was pretty much a great achievement. Torstensson stepped down. It looked like that was the story done. But he's come back to the club, Steve, and this season, like you've just said, they've just tonight beaten IFK Göteborg on their own ground, Steve, reminiscent of the Häcken title from a few years back, where Häcken also won the title for the first time in their history on IFK Göteborg's ground. So it's becoming a bit of a nice place for maiden title winners in Sweden at the moment to win it at IFK away. It was almost meant to be in some ways. But yeah, goals from Jacob Bergstrom and 2-0 win, sorry. Jacob Bergstrom, who is a bit of a legendary figure at the club, which we'll talk about in a bit, and Tom Pettersson as well. Another clean sheet for the club, and it's just a remarkable achievement, which we'll put into context. But yeah, the first thing to really say is just congratulations to Anders Torstensson. And Steve, the funny thing is, I've got a text message from him, which I'm going to just read out quickly now. And this just tells you how remarkable this achievement is, really, because every year we do our preseason predictions, as we do, Steve. And we did our preseason predictions. Even Torstensson, he gave us his 1, 2, and 3, who he thought would win the league. And Mjällby were not there. But after a few months of the season, in May, after they had beaten Hammarby away, Steve, this is about when the title whispers started. And I texted him, Anders Torstensson, 23rd of May, and I said, can Mjällby win Allsvenskan? With a question mark and a sort of like question mark emoji. And this is in May, Steve, after only a handful of games. He replies, not impossible, with a sort of like muscles emoji. And I always kept that in the back of my mind, Steve, from May. And literally fast forward 5-6 months, they're champions of Sweden for the first time ever. An unbelievable achievement for everyone at the club. We have to congratulate, obviously, Karl-Maris Axel as well, who we had on the podcast a few months ago. But the only thing I can really say, Steve, is I think this is, we've done this podcast 7-8 years now. I'm trying to think of, have I ever seen a bigger story in terms of like such a small club winning a major league? And I don't think I have, Steve. And the only other way I can really put this into context before we dive into it is Mjällby is, as Anders Torstensson described it in 2021, the team from the smallest village in the whole of Europe playing top division football. So I don't think there's any smaller top division club in the entire European football playing at the highest level in terms of a village club.
Yes.
So to win Allsvenskan, to win the league against a team with a 10 times budget in Malmo, pretty much, is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first port of call, really. No pun intended, because they are a port down there. How small the place is. I mean, the stadium is literally in a village with a population of certainly no more than, 1,000. There is a small town nearby called Sölvesborg or something like that, I do believe. Describe what Mjällby is in that area in Swedish soccer, because they're certainly not big by any means, are they? The resources as well, obviously, in terms of budget, people always ask this, what was their budget? There'll be some people listening thinking, oh, hold on, was there a sugar daddy here who managed to, get them to the title? But that's not the case, is it?
absolutely not the case, Stephen. If you listen to the beginning of the show when Torstensson he mentions it, he says, we have to basically be the best in the world at doing things that cost no money. This is not a team with any kind of budget. It's been completely organically built. Steve, the club was formed in 1939 by a mink farmer. It's literally a town of farmers, a village of farmers and fishermen, basically a sleepy little village. As you rightly put it, they're based. The Mjällby Stadium is in a village called Haulavik, which has about 600 people, 600 to 700 people. So it's the stadium is in a tiny, remote, part of the world. And Mjällby itself has a few thousand people. So whichever way you want to spin it, there's hardly anybody there. It's fishermen, it's farmers, it's mink farmers. They called themselves when they first started it, and excuse the swearing, but they originally called the club motto originally was something basically along the lines of playing football, the farmer bastards. That was just a bunch of farmers basically playing a bit of football in their spare time. And they play obviously in Stranvallen, and the club has organically grown really and just been a pretty much a small team. As little as 10 years ago, Steve, 9 years ago, this club was in the third tier. Now, when we actually spoke to Torstensson, they were fighting in a relegation battle just to stay in Allsvenskan. And at that point, we had him on the podcast because it was such a big achievement, even just to survive in the league and go close to sort of breaking an Allsvenskan record in terms of clean sheets, let alone anything to do with challenging for anything. It was not even part of the questions. There was no talk about building the club into anything. It was completely unthought of. But if you do go back and listen to that episode, you do get a sense that Torstensson is a man who can build things. And this has basically been organically built by the club. You have to look at the sporting directors, the coaches that he's put around. But in terms of answering your question, it really is a small village town. Now, in 2016, Steve, this team was playing for in the third tier. And in the last games of the season, they actually had a qualifier to survive to go down to the fourth tier of Swedish football. They played a team called Perspa, and they won the game. And the lines, their paths crossed each other. And if you actually look today, they survived obviously in the third tier at that point. Survived, eventually went back up to Superettan, the second division of Sweden. Eventually came back to Allsvenskan. We're a bit of a yo-yo club, maybe like a West Brom, maybe you might say, or something like that along those lines. But at the time that they won that crucial game to go down to avoid going down to the fourth tier, Steve, if you look today at the fates, the sliding doors moment in a sense for Mjällby, when you look at Prespa today, after that game in 2016, Prespa are now playing in the sixth division, Steve, of the Skåne Southwestern B League. So when you look at sliding doors, that could easily have been Mjällby sliding all the way out of professional football and all the way down to sort of like regional sixth tier. But they sort of managed to survive that game. One might call it a sort of fateful match, and restabilize themselves and came back to Allsvenskan level. But if you were looking at it from a sort of a European point of view, let's say an English point of view, even in Allsvenskan, they would be like a Burnley. They would be like a Leicester. They would be like a West Brom, like I've just said, a small team who is just getting by. Burnley is probably quite a good example in this. A small town, really, in English terms, and everything they do is put back into the community. I think where Torstensson comes in and why he's such a legendary figure, and Steve, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your impressions of Torstensson, because I remember you were very impressed after that first interview. Like before it, you didn't really know who he was, I think, but after it, you had a gleam in your eye, and I would like to hear you sort of tell the listeners about that. But I really think the evolution of the club has come from him from that day, because he stabilized the club. He's clearly an excellent defensive coach. He came in, he coached them on clean sheets. They had a very small budget. This is a team, Steve, with one of the lowest budgets in the league. If you actually look at the amount spent in Allsvenskan of all the teams in the league this year, for the 2025 season that survived in Sweden, they've spent the lowest amount of money. Them, Degerfors, and Gais and Oster are the four lowest spenders in terms of squad costs for the 2024-5 season. Now, we'll come on to Gais later. They're obviously third in the league. But yeah, Mjällby have spent less money in their operations than any other team that survived last season, if that makes sense. So, that's not newly promoted. As a comparison, Steve, for example, their squad budget is 6.7 million euros from that season. Malmo's is 52.72 million euros. Hacken 41.5 million. Djurgården 31.29 million. So, Hammarby, who they've managed to sort of win the league, 27.69 million. Värnamo, Steve, who have just gone rock bottom and got relegated, 7.05 million budget squad costs, total costs. Sorry, running costs for the club. Mjällby 6.72 million. So that's less than Värnamo. And what they've been able to do, and Torstensson has been able to do, is just with buying and selling, the elite use of coaches, people like Carl Maris Axum, Steve, who he's brought in as an attacking coach, someone who's come in and sort of helped the team build better patterns in terms of how they play going forward. They've just slowly over the last 4 years, bit by bit, grown from like a defensive side who have had the odd upset. Steve, they've won away at Malmo for many years in a row now, pretty much. I think they've won 3 of their last 4 visits to Malmo, for example. So they've always had a bit of an underdog ability to pull off a one-off result. But they've managed to transform that, Steve, through the intelligent recruitment, which we'll come on to, through even the intelligent recruitment of good coaches, through being a defensively solid unit with a tactically good shape, into a team, Steve, that has won 20 of its 27 games this season, 6 draws, 1 defeat, and as we say, for the first time in history, winning the league. And it's not only that, Steve. Like you just said earlier, they're on course to break the Allsvenskan record for points in a 30-game season. So this isn't only just like they've won the league. They've absolutely smashed the league out of the park. There was a point in the season about 3 or 4 weeks ago where they literally had the best points per game ratio of any team in the history of Allsvenskan. And last year, Steve, was Allsvenskan's 100-year anniversary. So we're talking about a century of dominance here, a century of league action. And they're averaging the most with pretty much the least amount of money possible. So it really is, you talk about Leicester City and that kind of thing. It's almost better than that in a way, just because of the fact that they can't attract a Riyad Mahrez. They can't find an N'Golo Kante in Mjällby. Like, the budget isn't even good enough to really do that and, scout these big European clubs. They've had to do it organically with a much smaller budget and find even lower paid players, if that makes sense, to be able to come in and mold the squad.
Yeah, look, it's a remarkable achievement from them. Last season in 2024, I actually forgot this. They did finish 5th. So it's not like they've come out of nowhere to actually win the league. 50 points on the board. They had the second best home record in the division. We know, like you said in the past, they had periods where their defense was really, really strong. And there's no doubt about it. For me, the core of their success this season is based around structure and defense, certainly in the second half of the season. I think that's fair to say. It reminds me an awful lot of how Leicester City won the league. In the early sort of matches, there were a few more entertaining, thrilling fixtures, and then it turned into 1-0 and 2-0 successes, a result team when they needed it most. I mean, they've won 6 of their last 7 games to 0, which just kind of shows composure, actually. I mean, we're all waiting for them. Even tonight, I was waiting for them to choke a little bit. Do you know where I'm coming from? I think I've been waiting for that dodgy run. Every team has a dodgy run, right? Apart from the Arsenal Invincibles of that year. Even they drew about 4 in a row at one point. But it never came. It just never came. We were all waiting for it. And it never came. And I think the manager, let's talk about the manager now, Anders Torstensson. I tweeted something today that he is a very, very modest man, and he is. He would always be the first man to give credit to the rest of his coaching team, the players, and the backroom staff. But I think he's a massive part here. Like you said, that interview you did with him that day, immediately, as soon as I heard it, I knew this guy. I mean, I would have run through a brick wall for him, just hearing some of the stuff he was saying. He was very inspiring. He was very to the point. He just didn't seem like a bullshitter at all. An honourable man. And I think it's quite clear he will get. He's a very good defensive coach, but I think he's very good man management as well with the players. He'll get the very most out of his whole squad. But tell me about Torstensson. You've spoken with him a few times. What is the key to his success on a personal level, but also a tactical level, Jonathan?
Yeah, and really, I'll never. I mean, for me, Steve, this story where we don't know where it will end, but at the moment it's at the peak, and I'll never forget the moment he emailed you, and basically confirmed the interview for exactly 1:30 p.m. the next day. It was the night before. Be there or be squared. And I remember there was like an element that you were. I don't think I could even make it, but there was something about me where it was like I can't miss this interview. And I was there at 1:30 in the dot, and obviously this ex-military man, I don't think he'd have been too happy if I'd have sort of like rescheduled or cancelled or turned out late or whatever. But it was always from that beginning of that first interview, Steve, wasn't it? There was something about it where I remember you messaged me after you listened to it, and you were like, "This guy's a bit different." Like you like you said, you'd run. There's not many interviews where I've seen with you where you were like, "I'll have 12 rounds of golf with that man any day of the week." You were buzzing about that interview, and ever since then we sort of had a rapport with him. I was lucky enough to meet him last year, obviously at the Hacken Mjällby game, and I chat with him. And obviously, he did invite you on that podcast, didn't he, Steve, on Patreon for a round of golf? I think the offer's still there potentially. But yeah, I think he's a personable character, Steve, and I also think what he's good at, and we might talk about this a little bit later with Rangers, Bran, and the whole debate about coaches and versus like ideologues or philosophers. I think in an age where sort of coaching, and I saw a really good clip with Will Steele. I don't know if you saw that on Twitter recently, where he was talking about the Southampton squad, and he was saying that literally when he spoke to the players, they didn't know that they were allowed to do certain things like pass the ball left or right. There's a really good clip doing the rounds on Twitter at the moment. He's saying they're having to be basically reprogrammed because they've been so drilled to like do one thing when they get the ball, like you turn and you pass left, that they don't even know that they're allowed to do other things. And I think it's a debate that we're having in the Premier League at the moment, isn't it? About the sort of like everything's becoming a bit more regimented, isn't it? 30% of goals in the Premier League this season, Steve, are set pieces. The team that's probably favourites to win the league is pretty much because they can take a corner. In an age where sort of like managers have their philosophy in there and they don't want to change it, I think what Torstensson's done very well is, are we talking about an elite manager here? That's a debate for everyone else to have. But my point is, I don't think he's like an elite manager, like looked at as regarded as an elite manager in the sense of like a Rydstrom, who we'll talk about in a bit, who's obviously lost his job in the past week since we've last recorded, last week or two. I don't think he's regarded as that kind of like tactical manager that's going to carve you open. But what I think he's very good at, Steve, and I think where this title has been won for such an underdog team, is I think he's a man. He's a military mastermind, isn't it? That was the name of the episode. He's a man that understands the art of war, basically, how to go into a battle and win. And I think what that involves is also, Steve, it's about knowing your strengths and it's about knowing your weaknesses. And I think what Torstensson has been able to do, and I think Karl-Maria Saxum, who is the assistant manager and one of the sort of attacking coaches at Mjällby, who we also had on the podcast earlier this year, you can go back and listen to that on Spotify or wherever you get your show. He identified it in that interview as well. I remember speaking to him, and he basically said that he had been brought in to sort of evolve their attacking game. This was a low-scoring team. They don't score too many. They keep a good number of clean sheets, but they don't score too many. And you can see clear evolution in their game this season, Steve. They're much better in transition. They play that sort of 3-4-3 shape. They've got Stroud, who's basically becoming effectively an attacking wing-back/winger. They're very good in the pocket. If you look in the midfield spaces, Steve, in terms of how they retain sort of like a box midfield maybe, and they create an advantage based on that. They've got very good technical players in different positions. They've got a solution for almost every game style. They can sort of play in the low block, but they can also sort of press higher now. They're better at pressing. Their use of midfield is very good. And I think that's where the key to them winning the title has really come. Like, they've been able to literally squeeze, as he said at the top of the show, like they've squeezed every single drop out of like every person at the club. And I think that's Torstensson's role. I think he's empowered the coaches and gone, listen, you're in charge of attacking the coaches here. You're in charge of our attacking game here. And what Karl-Maria Saxum said, he's a very good listener. He will listen to like suggestions. He won't just come in and say, right, this is my style, Steve. He's not a Ruben Amorim maybe or a Russell Martin type where he'll say, this is my style and I'm never going to change it. From listening to what Karl-Maria Saxum said and other people at the club, he's someone who will listen to others and then he'll have sort of like the overview. And that's, I think, emotional intelligence, isn't it, at the end of the day? That's having the self-awareness to go, all right, I'm good at these things, but there are people who are better than me at other things. And then finding those people, bringing them into your organization and then letting them get on with the job. And I think that is a skill in itself, Steve, with no ego. You have to bear in mind, Steve, as well. This is a club, like you asked about the keys to what they've done. This is a club that in the last year, they've lost some key players. You know, in the middle of the season, Steve, they lost their best centre midfielder, Niklas Rokia, who went to Denmark for nearly 2 million euros. This is a club who has time after time basically had to rebuild over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and gradually the annual budget has just got better and better. With smart recruitment from Hasse Larsson, who was a legend of the club, by the way, and was in pretty much close to tears at the end of this game after in his post-match interview, because he's been at the club for, I think he said, roughly 30 more years. Who's now the sporting director, and he's had a few tussles this season. Even the whole keeping their main striker this summer, who nearly went to Olympiacos. You know, even that alone, that battle, or losing Rossler, for example, Colin Rossler to Malmo in last year. You know, they've had to lose a lot of players to the bigger clubs, but they've been able to sort of retain the squad. They've done great scouting, found some really, really good players, and yeah, that's it really. I think this is a title win for the really old school coaches, like the kind of like not these fashionable managers who have this one way of playing. This is, I think, a victory for the kind of like the underdog coach who can come in, look at a situation, and not have the ego to sort of say, this is what I'm doing, it's about me, but actually go, no, it's about the rest of the collective, and how do we basically build something bigger than one of its parts. And I think that's success, really.
Do you know, I watched that game against IFK Göteborg tonight, and it was almost like it summed up their season, because what Mjällby are, they're the best defensive team in Allsvenskan. I think they are probably the best team from set pieces in Allsvenskan at both ends of the field. And I'm not going to say they're the best attack in Allsvenskan. That's probably Hammarby, isn't it? But they're probably the most efficient attack, is a good way of saying it. And when you combine that together, that's why you win the league with 3 games to spare. I mean, they're an overachievement in the metrics here. I talked about it with this you off air. They've overachieved at both ends of the field, as happens with most national champions, by the way. I've never known a league winner underachieve with the metrics, apart from the Leeds team under Bielsa. 7 goals overachievement on expected goals. That's pretty normal, really. 20 goals overachievement defensively. Don't know what it was in terms of expected points, Jonathan. Maybe you could find that out. But I think this defense, right, is, I mean, the system is certainly 3 at the back, 3-4-3 or a variation of it. And I think when I look at the way they play, I don't feel they get lucky. They've got a very good goalkeeper who's moving to Como now. That is definitely a part of the overachievement. But I think the defence in itself, the way he structures the side, this is where metrics can be a load of bollocks, I think, sometimes. They might concede expected goals numbers in patches, but you never really feel like they're going to concede. Do you know where I'm coming from? You don't feel like they're going to concede the goal because of where the shot's coming from, or the moments that he puts players in positions to prevent the goals. So I think you say Torstensson is just an old school coach. He's nothing like Sean Dyche or anything for me. He does have a system. It's not too complicated, which I think is a major strength. But at the same time, it's certainly not basic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not basic at all. I think they've played some of the most dynamic football in the league this season, and you know, you've described it there, and I completely agree with you. Really, you know, and the numbers tell themselves. They've scored 49 goals this season in 27 games. Okay, Hammarby have scored more, but it's the second best scoring record in the league, more than Malmo, for example, who have an embarrassment of riches in their squad in terms of quality. They've conceded just 17 goals, Steve. This is just an unbelievable defensive record. So they've married the two together, and that has come through people like Carl Marius Axum, who obviously, you know, we talked about as a PhD in elite scanning, and you know, has come in. He brought in real experts in their different various positions, I think, at the club as well, and that is part of it. You know, where I think it differs, Steve, as well, it's like the club has built itself. They play good football, and they're a good squad. You know, and they've got some legendary characters like Jacob Bergstrom, you know. But when you look at the career paths of some of these people, their career paths are completely different to sort of say, like, that's what I mean about the Leicester City tale or any other team. I was just reading, Steve, that apparently the only other small club in the last decade, I think, in terms of a village town to win the league was in Romania. Do you remember was it Universitatea? Was it?
There was one.
Unaria Uzachesley?
You are right. I think I remember there was a
But the difference is they were backed by a billionaire or a multi-millionaire owner, and I think this is what makes the story so special in Sweden, Steve, is the fact that essentially this is a member-owned league, so it's a bit like the Bundesliga, right? So this is almost in a way, it's a bit like if you took it as an example in Germany, it would be like if Bochum won the league or a team like that against Bayern Munich, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Because the way the member-owned structure means is it's almost like the 50+1 rule, where clubs are not allowed to have outside investment from a sugar daddy type owner. So you can't naturally build a squad with a billionaire owner who comes in and kind of pumps the club full of money or whatever. Even if you look at Leicester City, they were one of the biggest earners in terms of like funding from owner funding that season when they won the Premier League. Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it. It's still an unbelievable story. But it's not like that in Sweden. These are like local. The one thing about Swedish football, I think, is these are like local community clubs where they don't have they're not really allowed by regulations outside investment to sort of like come in and throw loads of money into it. So by that nature, they have to be creative in how they do things. So a better comparison to Leicester would be literally like taking a league like the Bundesliga, or it would be like if you took, maybe a Burnley type figure, but there's not the revenues of like a Burnley. If you're in the Premier League in England, Burnley will get 100 million this season just for being in the Premier League, from broadcast rights, from just from match day. Sorry, not match day income, but from broadcast income alone, just from being on TV, just by being part of the Premier League. There isn't that revenue in Allsvenskan to sort of like pump teams full of money, if you get what I mean. So that's one part of it, and then the other part of it, Steve, is like what it does for the rest of the league, because I don't think you're going to see any kind of story like this again for a long time in European football. Simply because it gives other teams, it gives every other team in Sweden the thought that they could one day achieve that. Leicester was different, isn't it? Although you do tell the story of like, okay, Southampton could win the league or someone else could win the league. It's not quite the same. But out of this, realistically, Ike Braga could win the league next season, or they're not going to be in the league, but obviously you get what I mean. Like, it gives all those smaller clubs hope. Värnamo, why can't Värnamo win the league if they have a higher actually budget than Mjällby? Like it realistically makes it that there's no excuses for a lack of organisation almost. So in a way, Steve, it's kind of like Torstensson and his team have almost held Allsvenskan to rights and said, listen, we can do it. Anyone can do it. You just got to be a bit smart. And obviously, Mjällby had a bad season, but they're still like, their average attendance, Steve, at Mjällby is roughly 3,000 to 4,000, max 5,000. Compared to sort of like Hammarby, Djurgården, or Core getting 20,000 plus every week in the stadium, every fortnight in the stadium. So the income for those other clubs is massive compared to a Mjällby. So to think that they're going to be playing Champions League football is just really remarkable.
Let's just talk about the players, because we've said this before. We look at some of the recruitment they've done. We look at some of the players they've got, and they do have good players. It's not like they've won the league with complete no-hopers here, or players that have just fluked it for a year. Several of their squad would get in the best Allsvenskan team of the season. How have they managed to get these players in and nick such great talent ahead of other teams, bigger clubs in the league? I mean, it's almost two questions in one, but tell me about the really, really key players this season that have propelled them to the title race, and ultimately, how did Mjällby get their mitts on these guys?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the only way really to answer that is, again, it's the collective. They have a lot of very good people behind the scenes working for them. I think, as we've just mentioned there, Hasse Larsson has to take a huge amount of credit as the sporting director. I think, when you look at him, he's been at the club, as I said earlier, for 40 plus years. He said tonight, "I've dreamed of this moment since I was a little boy." He said he can't believe it. It's so good for all the law people who have been at this association for such a long time. I am so happy for them. It will take me a few days to sink in. I can't believe it. I still can't believe we'll be playing Champions League football. But you have to sort of like credit him, I think, Steve, in terms of what he's done, building this club up from a sporting director point of view. The recruitment, let's look at the Mjällby squad as an example. They've brought in players for like peanuts from these various clubs. They haven't really had a budget to kind of properly invest, Steve, in players. It's had to be a buy-sell philosophy. They've lost, as I said, Nicholas Rockya for 1.7 million, their main centre midfielder, even this season alone, and then they've had to replace him. And they've done it quite well. Everyone that they've bought recently, Steve, has been bought in quite well. They have Abdoulaye Mane, who, although he hasn't had the best end of the season, he definitely spearheaded them winning this title at the beginning of the season. The Gambian player, Steve, is a great example of their recruitment policies. He was a player who came from a Gambian club. He had trials at several different other places in Sweden. He was rejected from other bigger clubs. And then he went to train at Mjällby, Steve. They gave him a contract, and now he nearly got sold to Olympiacos for multi-million revenue. He's someone who's come in. Carl Marius actually on the podcast said he thinks he could play in the Premier League. He's that kind of physical striker, and really added that bit of thrust to their game, which they kind of, like you said, they finished fifth in previous seasons. They have been quite a solid, organised team, Steve, but they lack that attacking impetus that someone like Mane has helped bring into the team. An excellent example of their recruitment. They've brought in players like Elliot Stroud, Steve, who, I'm really surprised, and I think he's got to be a candidate for player of the season, really, in Allsvenskan this year. 26 games, 7 goals, 5 assists from basically a left wing-back position. Absolutely incredible numbers. I mean, this is a player, Steve, that they signed on a free transfer from IK Oddevold in the third tier of Swedish football.
It's bonkers, isn't it? That is ridiculous.
Played his entire career at Oddevold. They developed him into a player now who has had interest from several clubs around Europe. He's an absolute stud of a left back, in my opinion, in this league, Steve. He's been incredible for 2 seasons now, in my opinion, and it's really unbelievable he's still there. Really good up and down runner, good left foot. Kind of like maybe a Allsvenskan's Bale in some ways. Sort of straight back runner down that left flank, really tall, physical. Signed on a free transfer. You've got the old guard, Steve, players like sort of Jacob Bergstrom, big Jacob Bergstrom, who we talked about in this podcast, with his big smile, Steve. I remember describing him as a player who, I'll never forget the moment in one game 3 or 4 years back where he's that big of a unit. He smashed he collided with the crossbar, and the crossbar came off worse. He nearly broke the crossbar. He's such a physical unit. But when you look at his career history, Steve, I mean, he's only scored, I think, 5-6 goals in Allsvenskan this season, but he's such a character for the club. He went to Djurgården. It didn't quite work out for him. But if you look at that before that, I mean, his career basically has been a brief spell at Mjøndalen. He played for Ronneby, Steve, FK Karlskrona. He's basically played in regional football for a lot of his career. And he's gone to somewhere like Mjällby and just been a real kind of totem pole of a figure for the club, like character-wise. He's led the team. He scored tonight, the opening goal in such a big game to help basically effectively win them the title, Steve. You can look at Herman Johansson down the right flank, for example, another one who might get a move. He come from Sandvikens, Steve, in 2021 on a free transfer. So these players are players that are just being signed from small clubs. The best way to describe it would be maybe someone like Abdullah Iqbal, Steve. He is a Pakistani player. Basically, nobody had ever really heard of him in terms of like the world football. He played for B93 in the Danish lower divisions. He signs for Mjällby for 200,000 euros, Steve, last season, and he's arguably been one of the best defenders in the league this season. And he's almost now one really highly regarded in the league. Everywhere you look, Steve, basically you can name players like that. And one final one that I'd probably touch on in terms of key men as well. The only, to sum it all up, really, is Noel Tornqvist in goal. Now, I know you like a goalkeeper, Steve. This is a player who started his career with Halmstad's youth teams, played a little bit for AFC Eskilstuna on loan, never really did much, Steve, but he's been developed into a player that now will be heading at the end of this season to Como in Serie A to play under Cesc Fabregas, Steve. A real brilliant goalkeeper, probably the best goalkeeper in the league this season. He's still only 23. So it's really the coaching as well as the sort of recruitment that have all come together, finding these really unpolished gems essentially and polishing them into top players. Tornqvist was in tears at the end of this game, Steve, by the way. He couldn't control himself from crying. He was saying the experience he's had at Mjällby don't forget this transfer was done in the summer. He could easily have left the club, but he stayed. He didn't fancy Lake Como in the summer because he's committed himself to this cause to win the league. And I think that just sums it all up, Steve. You know what I mean? He basically told a Serie A team, listen, I want to wait and win the league at Mjällby before I go and join Cesc Fabregas. And that sums everything up about Mjällby. Like, it's the team ethic. They're all in it together. And that togetherness has won them the league.
Yeah, I think he's going through another great project there, by the way. Como have really, really impressed me this season. They are going places. I mean, I tell you what, Jonathan, that it's always been a back five, hasn't it? Or back three and wing backs, whatever. He's always had, whoever plays in those positions, they've always performed for Torstensson. So those are the positions he clearly up coaches always. And they've always had a decent keeper, haven't they, as well? A certain type of keeper, a commanding goalkeeper. That's his type. He ain't bothered about on the ball as much. He wants a commanding keeper, and Tornquist tonight was exceptional. Did everything spot on, didn't he, against Göteborg? Any threat they had, he soon, dealt with it. And he's been the best goalkeeper in the league this season. Stroud surely has to be player of the season, like you said. I can't really think who else it can be, to be honest. Nicholas Rokia, how is he feeling tonight? He was so important for them in that first half of the season. 14 appearances, 5 goals, 4 assists. He'll still get a medal, I think, surely with 14 appearances, but it's not the same, is it, if you didn't go through with it right till the end. Mane, like you said, I think I look back at his stats here, 7 goals, 4 assists, but he's one of those players, really, it's not about the stats, is it? It's about the pressures that he puts on the opponents, the runs he makes down the channels there. It's an incredible squad. And I guess the next question is, and there was an interesting on X today. Someone responded to us on questions for the pod. James said, James MCK 1902, amazing, well done. It would be quality if they did a Bodo Glimt and took over the league. That's the next question, is it? Where do they go from here? Can they be the new Bodo Glimt? Is it going to be a flash in the pan? Where are the players going to go? Are some going to stay? Are some going to go? What about Torstensson? He's achieved this unbelievable thing. By the way, Anders Torstensson, in his first spell that kept them up in that 2021 year, averaged 1.8 points per game. That was title-winning form. And now 1.89 points per game since he was appointed in 2023. So where do they go from here?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. And I think just one thing coming out of the news tonight in terms of everything that's happening, obviously just a poignant moment to talk about how much Mjällby as a collective means. Obviously, a bit of an ironic twist in this game tonight was that Imam Yanyi, who played for Mjällby last season, played for IFK tonight against Mjällby, of course. And after the game, he's come out and basically said he had an emotional moment with Tom Pettersson, formerly of Östersund, another player that they've got for a bargain price, essentially, and turned him into one of the best, defenders in the league. He actually went and gave him Mjällby his shirt at the end of the match, just as a sort of sign to say, listen, you used to be one of us, you know what I mean? And we still consider you one of us. And I think that's just a wonderful moment, and Yanyi said he was personally touched by that. And it just sums up that kind of togetherness that they've built at this football club. But in answer to your question, Steve, one of the other things that's coming out tonight, which is quite an interesting comment to your listener question there, I don't think this is going to be another Bodo Glimt necessarily. I'm not sure if they're going to have the resources to do that, just being such a small club. But the other reason, Steve, is potentially a bit of breaking news maybe. Anders Torstensson has actually tonight opened the door to leaving the club in his post-match interview. And he's basically said he's got an indefinite contract, which he did say in 2021 as well, by the way. So you can't read too much into it, because he is a club legend. He's been at the club for many, many years. He's part of the furniture. It's that village feel. They turn to him because he's like an old friend. It's like an old slipper, basically putting on an old slipper and gloves when you get home at night. They turn to him to rescue them. He's won in the league now, and he's basically said that he's not sure what will happen. But the rumor that's coming out is that he might be just offered a club president role and sort of step back. And Karl Marius Axum, if that's the case, is the favourite to take over as Mjällby head coach.
From within.
Secret, of course, he did make it pretty clear in our interview with him that he does have ambitions of becoming a head coach. So that could make sense, the Norwegian, from that point of view. Watch this space, I guess. But if he does take over, the challenge is really going to be to sort of like, can they build this dynasty in the same way Glimp does? This isn't going to be, I don't think Torstensson is not going to be another sort of Kitchener Knudsen. Do you know what I mean? He's not going to be there for 8-9 years, let's face it. We have to also mention, Steve, that he has had his personal health issues. I mean, it was only last August that it was publicly announced that he was suffering quite a serious illness, Torstensson. So you have to factor that in as well. And for him to come back from that and manage the club with everything involved around his diagnosis, which was a very serious diagnosis, by the way, which I won't dwell on. But, even to come back from that is a personal battle that he's overcome. So it might make sense that he might be thinking to himself, listen, what more can I do? I came back to help this club survive 4 years ago, and I'm potentially leaving a league champion in the Champions League. He may want to listen to the Champions League anthem, though, Steve, for a couple of years. Because I don't think that will be in Holloway ever again, maybe necessarily. But I think the one thing is, if you look at Hasse Larsson, for example, been there 45 years, Steve. What's next for him as a sporting director? He got very annoyed last season, Steve, with the Colin Rosler stuff. And I remember one comment where he said he would never speak to one of the agents again, basically, because he was so frustrated about how things were dealt with the Colin Rosler to Malmo transfer. Someone like that who's been at the club since he was a boy, does he really want to be sticking around trying to build a dynasty? Or is it more about kind of just sort of like they've won the league now? I think this will be a really big reflection point for a lot of the people who have been at the club for sort of 10, 20, 30 years, where next? But in terms of the resources, there's no reason to think they can't challenge again next season, I don't think, whether Torstensson stays or doesn't stay. Carl Maris Axelman is a very promising coach. He's got a PhD in scanning. He's studied the game. He did part of his thesis at Arsenal, so I'm sure he might know how to sort of like organize a team from set pieces. Torstensson has empowered a lot of those coaches, but there's no reason they can't maybe go on. I think they will lose some players. Tornqvist will go. I expect Mane to probably get a move. There'll be others, but if they recruit correctly, Steve, I think they could challenge again. And I think ultimately, where Beckel Hacken really failed, in my opinion, was they didn't really build on that maiden title a few years back. They lost so many players that it was really hard for them, despite the fact they have infinitely more money than Mjällby. I think they had their budget I mentioned it earlier, it's at least 4 or 5 times bigger. But I think the problem with them is they didn't really have that strategy to sort of keep the top players at the club and build. That will be the challenge now for Mjällby. Can they do that to create themselves into more of a dynasty like a Buda Glimt? Because the foundations are there. Malmo have not had a strong season. I know Malmo have won sort of 8 of the last 12 league titles, and that's why this is such an unbelievable story with all the finances they have. But there's trouble at Malmo at the moment, isn't there, Steve? Hammarby, I think, will come back next season potentially. You've got Geis and people like that who could maybe look to challenge for the league. It will really empower a lot of the lower teams to think to themselves, listen, why can't we challenge? But I think to make it a Glimt thing is very, very difficult. Right now, I think we should just live in the moment of what is arguably one of the greatest achievements in European football for this century, at least, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the same questions were asked after Buda Glimt won the title in 2020. I think I'll have to listen back, but I probably said something like it was a freak year. It was COVID. It's probably not going to happen again. They're going to probably lose the manager and the best players, and it's probably a flash in the pan. But what they did, I mean, they were better almost defending the title. And that second season is the most important one. But you're right, Biko Häcken didn't make the most of a chance to not dominate, but be a real regular title challenger for the next sort of 4 or 5 years. They didn't stamp on it, whereas Buda Glimt did. Mjällby said, he's going to be difficult for them. Of course it is. I think for them, if they could just always be in and around, say, the top 6, is something which would be good for them. Looking to get into Europe in certain weeks. In terms of Torstensson, we wish him the very best, whatever he decides to do. We know he's been fighting personal battles there behind the scenes, and that makes it all more than remarkable if he decides to do like a Claudio Ranieri at Roma. Reminds me of that, where they put him upstairs. He's still there. He's in the background with probably still quite a lot of influence when he needs it. And that's a great thing. The difference is he can go 18 holes in a morning, can't he? And then come into work. Do you know where I'm coming from? If they did promote from within, I think it'd be a very good hire. Torstensson's not going to ever go anywhere else, is he? I mean, if you cut him, Mjällby's in his totally in his blood. It's everywhere. It's in his life, and he's a legend there. So yeah, I think it's an intriguing story. I mean, for now, all we can say is well done. So many good results. I've been looking back. I was trying to look back and find out what price they were to win the league. I think that at minimum was 100 to 1, probably bigger, to win the Allsvenskan. Leicester were 5,000 to 1, of course. But this is still a huge, huge achievement. Crucial result. I mean, if you actually, I wonder what the profit and loss would be if you had backed Mjällby to win every match blind this season. Some of the odds you'd have got, they were huge underdogs in some of the wins. I mean, when they won at Malmo, they would have been big. When they won at Hammarby, they were about 5 to 1. It's incredible. I look back at some of these crucial results, and there's so many moments, isn't it, where it was won and lost. But yeah, it's incredible. So well done. Any more thoughts before we close?
The only thought I'll leave you with really is they are the 17th title winner in Swedish football. They're the 5th to win Allsvenskan since Malmo 11 years ago. So there is a bit of variety in the Swedish league. There's no VAR in the Swedish league, so we have to admit that maybe this is an entertaining league to keep following, because it is hard to predict who's going to win it, and you do get every now and then these sort of upsets. But the only way to really finish it is just to say congratulations to Karl-Marius Axum, who we had on the show earlier in the season. Congratulations to Labino Bajrami, who is part of the academy and recruitment team, Hasse Larsson, and ultimately Anders Torstensson as well. Not only for his time, giving us his interview, and I think we've done 2 interviews with him now, and also met him in person, but also just in general for what he's done for Swedish football, coming back, and showing coaches that there's not just one way to skin a cat. And we will see what the future holds, and the whole squad really, because I have to say, Steve, and we also should congratulate Hammarby because they did put in a decent title race. They kept up with them for as long as they could, and I think they have been the 2 best teams in the league this season, along with Guys. They're the 3 teams I would say that have made this an entertaining season to watch from that point of view. But really, Mjällby, for such an achievement, it is something that will, like I say, I think it is the biggest achievement in European football, arguably of the 20th of this century, in terms of the underdog story. For such a small village team to win the league, massive congratulations. And let's see if they can now break the Allsvenskan points record.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Google Maps. I mean, this is incredible. If you actually zoomed in on the village of Hullavik, you wouldn't have a clue that is an Allsvenskan stadium. You would actually think it's just like a training pitch or something. I mean, I'm gonna have to get out there at some point. I really am, to Solversborg. I see the golf course there. Solversborg Golf Club for hit of a round would be incredible. In that region, I'm just wondering where they're going to end up playing their Champions League games, because the UEFA aren't going to approve that stadium, are they? It would have to be Kalmar or Malmo, surely.
Yeah, there's talk of a Kalmar, I think, or Malmo, like you said.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've got to get myself out to that. I looked actually sort of basing myself in maybe the Malmo region for a few games once, although apparently Malmo's a really, really dangerous city, and you don't want to be seen there at night. Yeah, it's a part of the country which, it's dominated by Malmo in terms of region, but they're kind of on their own a bit, aren't they, out there? What an incredible! I'm almost lost for words how this has happened. And this has been nearly an hour now, so do you know what? We should probably just have this as a standalone episode, like in dedication to Torstensson and Mjällby. What do you think? I mean, Mjällby title winners. That's it, isn't it? That's the pod.
That's the pod. I think. I mean, obviously, we will come back and record maybe a part 2. Whether we release it together or separately, we shall see. But absolutely, yeah, I think that has to be a pretty comprehensive summary of what Mjällby have done this season. So, yeah, perhaps we could leave it there.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Congratulations to Mjällby.
Yeah, well done. 2025 Allsvenskan champions. They could be the best ever champions. It's been a hell of a journey to follow, and hopefully there's more mileage in it yet in future years. So, yeah, well, from this possible standalone episode, goodbye from me and you, Jonathan. We'll see you very, very soon.
Well, what I'd like to ask is let us know on Twitter at Nordic Footpod or on YouTube if you're listening on YouTube or on the Spotify comments as well. I think you can leave comments there now. Do you think this is the greatest title win in European football over the last 25 years or ever? Or where would you rank this? Is there any other regional sort of village team that we've missed out or that you might have been part of somewhere in Europe or the world that could compare? Let us know. But for now, whether it's in part 2 or whether it's on a separate episode, Steve, all we can say really is congratulations to Mjällby.